In court, the ex-husband called her crazy and asked for full custody. The judge almost believed it until their 6-year-old daughter pulled out a tablet and turned on the video. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The late spring air in Atlanta was warm, scented faintly with magnolia and distant pavement heat. Olivia stood in the narrow kitchen of her rental duplex, carefully flipping pancakes while the sound of Saturday morning cartoons drifted in from the living room. The walls were thin. She could hear everything: the screechy theme song, the occasional thump of her daughter jumping off the couch, and the muffled laughter that brought a small, protective smile to her lips. The place was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a roof that sometimes sighed when it rained. But to Olivia, it was safety. It was peace. It was the first home where she could finally breathe without fearing the silence. Skylar, her 6-year-old daughter, barreled into the kitchen in her mismatched pajamas, one sock sliding half off her foot. Her curls were a tangle of sleep and freedom, and her cheeks were still warm from bed. She clambered up onto the stool at the counter, hugging her worn stuffed unicorn to her chest. "Can I have the one with the crispy edges?" Olivia turned with the spatula in hand, nodding. "Of course you can. That one's the best one." There was a rhythm now to their mornings, gentle, predictable. Olivia kept the music low and her voice softer. After what they'd been through, it felt like constructing a world from tissue paper, one careful movement at a time. Skylar had started calling their home the bubble. It was her word for the safety they had. Olivia never corrected her. She liked the idea of a bubble, a fragile sphere where nothing sharp could get in. It hadn't always been like this. Less than a year ago, Olivia had lived with Trey Blake in a sprawling suburban house with high ceilings and glass railings, the kind of place realtors called modern luxury. It had looked perfect in photos and felt like a trap in real life. Trey had charm like armor. He smiled with his whole face, remembered birthdays, made the best jokes at dinner parties. Everyone loved him. That was the problem. Trey knew exactly when to raise his voice and when to lower it. He had a talent for turning the temperature in a room just enough that no one else noticed the shift but Olivia. He wasn't violent. He never hit her. That made it harder, easier to doubt herself. He controlled everything instead: her bank account, her schedule, the clothes she wore. He spoke over her in conversations, cut her off mid-thought, and told her she was too emotional when she cried. When she suggested counseling, he laughed and asked if she was planning to write a memoir. That was Trey. Sharp, disarming, and poisonous in ways only she could see. When she finally left, it wasn't because of one dramatic moment. It was after a quiet night in the kitchen when Skylar spilled juice on the floor and Trey's face twisted into something inhuman. He shouted so loud the glass in the cabinet rattled. Skylar had gone so still that she looked like she was trying to disappear into the tiles. Olivia had taken her hand, said nothing, and the next morning packed 2 suitcases while Trey was at the gym. They never went back. The court had ruled for joint custody. Standard, fair, in the child's best interest. Olivia didn't have the money to fight it then. She'd been scraping together freelance bookkeeping jobs, working through the night while Skylar slept beside her. She paid bills with one eye on her daughter's face, wondering how much damage she'd already absorbed from their old life. At first, the shared custody seemed manageable. Trey picked Skylar up on Fridays and returned her Sundays at 6 p.m. Olivia followed the schedule, bit her tongue, stayed polite. She thought if she stayed small and calm, things would get better. But they didn't. The changes in Skylar were subtle at first: quiet dinners, less coloring. Then came the nightmares, the silences, the way she clung to Olivia on Sunday evenings like she was afraid she wouldn't be allowed to come back. One night, Olivia found her curled up in the corner of her room, whispering to her unicorn. When asked what was wrong, Skylar simply said, "Daddy says not to talk about weekends." Olivia tried to keep it together. She documented everything. Every time Skylar came back with a new anxiety, every conversation where Trey called her parenting unstable, every email that ended with a veiled threat about court. She built a digital folder labeled "just in case," but no matter how much she gathered, she never felt ready. Skylar didn't talk about Trey. Not directly, but her body did. Her eyes, her drawings, the way she flinched when someone raised their voice. Olivia brought it up in therapy, unsure if she was projecting her own trauma onto her daughter. The therapist just looked at her and said, "Children don't hide fear unless they're taught to." Her mother, Janet, became a lifeline. She lived just 8 blocks away and had been quietly helping from the beginning. Janet wasn't the emotional type. She didn't do long hugs or teary affirmations, but she showed up. She brought groceries without asking, folded laundry while pretending she was just dropping by, and once scrubbed Olivia's entire bathroom while she was in a Zoom meeting. "You're doing better than you think," she'd said at once, passing Olivia a mug of tea. "But you'll never think it. That's how I know you are." Skylar adored her grandmother. They had a standing Friday ritual when Olivia had deadlines. Janet picked Skylar up from school. They made macaroni with peas and watched nature documentaries. Skylar called it Grammy Fridays and always returned home smelling faintly of lavender and dryer sheets. That morning, after pancakes and cartoons, Skylar sat at the kitchen table drawing a picture with a pink marker. Olivia peeked over her shoulder. The drawing was of a big house with 2 people, one small and smiling, one tall and frowning. Between them was a jagged red line. Olivia felt something tug in her chest. "Who's that?" she asked gently, pointing to the tall figure. Skylar shrugged. "Just someone mean." Olivia didn't press. She'd learned not to. Later that afternoon, Trey arrived for pickup. He pulled up in his polished white SUV, wearing sunglasses and that familiar, effortless smile. He rang the doorbell like a guest who brought wine. Olivia opened the door, arms crossed, Skylar's backpack already in hand. "You look tired," Trey said. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine," she said coolly. "She's ready." He crouched down to Skylar's level and offered his arms. She hesitated for a split second before hugging him. "I'll see you Sunday," Olivia said to her daughter, not him. Trey glanced over his shoulder as they walked to the car. "We should talk sometime about long-term plans. This current setup, it's not sustainable." Olivia didn't answer. She just stood in the doorway until the SUV disappeared down the street. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her bed felt too big, the apartment too quiet. The silence she used to crave now felt like a countdown. Every moment Skylar wasn't home felt like a question she couldn't answer. Was she okay? Was she scared? Was he yelling? She lay awake until 2 a.m., watching the ceiling and replaying every warning sign she'd ignored. Every moment she'd convinced herself things weren't that bad. And she knew this couldn't continue. She had to find a way to stop pretending they were co-parenting in any real sense of the word. Skylar wasn't safe. Olivia could feel it. And she was running out of time to prove it. What she didn't know, lying there with a knot in her chest and guilt pressing against her ribs, was that Skylar was already making her own plan. Quiet, careful and braver than any adult around her. The little girl with the tangle of curls and the unicorn pajamas had decided something no one could have predicted. If they wouldn't believe her mommy, she would make them. And the world, so convinced by Trey's polished charm, was about to be shown what the truth looked like through the eyes of a 6-year-old. It started, like most revolutions, with something small. A pink school tablet in a sparkly case, and a quiet decision to hit record. The Sunday handoff always felt like a performance. Trey's white SUV would glide to a halt with calculated ease, his sunglasses always perched just so on his face, his smile as practiced as it was hollow. Olivia stood outside their duplex with Skylar's backpack in hand, watching as her daughter climbed out of the car with shoulders hunched, her little fingers clinging to the straps of her bag as if they could hold together something invisible inside her. "Thanks," Olivia said curtly, barely looking Trey's way. He returned a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Always a pleasure." And then he was gone, engine humming down the block, tires smooth against the pavement like nothing had ever happened. Like he hadn't spent the past 48 hours pulling his daughter's spirit through emotional barbed wire. Skylar walked ahead of Olivia into the house, not saying much, which had become more common. Her steps were slow, deliberate. There was a gravity in her that hadn't existed a year ago. She passed the living room and headed straight for her room. Olivia gave her a moment, listening through the cracked door. No humming, no sound of toys, just the faint rustle of her blanket. She followed her in, sitting at the edge of the bed. Skylar was already burrowed under the covers, facing the wall. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Olivia asked gently. A pause, then a shrug beneath the quilt. "Did you eat anything weird at Daddy's?" Another shrug. "Did he?" Olivia stopped herself. She didn't want to plant thoughts. She didn't want to scare her daughter more than she already was, but she needed to know. "You can tell me anything, Sky." Skylar finally rolled over. Her eyes were tired in that way no 6-year-olds should ever be. She reached for her stuffed unicorn and hugged it tight. "He said not to talk about it," she whispered. Olivia's stomach clenched. "Who did?" "Daddy." There was silence between them. Heavy, palpable. Olivia smoothed her daughter's hair and tucked the blanket around her a little tighter. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." Later that night, Olivia sat on the couch with a notebook in her lap, scribbling down fragments. Times, dates, Skylar's words, the silence in her body. She logged them all, trying to make patterns from broken pieces. She opened her laptop and reviewed the just-in-case folder. Dozens of emails from Trey criticizing her parenting, screenshots of texts laced with sarcasm and subtle threats, recorded voicemails where his voice, though never overtly abusive, carried the edge of control. But it wasn't enough. It didn't show what happened when no one else was looking. She'd once tried to record a conversation between him and Skylar during a drop-off, but he was too careful. Trey knew how to behave when phones were near. His cruelty wasn't in punches or screams. It was in gaslighting and undermining and carefully constructed fear. Skylar didn't want to draw anymore. That was the first real sign. For a girl who used to cover every surface in rainbows and castles, the absence of color was louder than any cry for help. Olivia found her notebook untouched, crayons dried out and broken. When she asked why, Skylar just said, "I don't know what to draw anymore." During school pickups, her teachers noted she seemed quieter, more withdrawn, reluctant to speak during group activities. When Olivia took her to the school counselor, Skylar stared at the carpet the whole session and nodded when asked if she liked visiting Daddy. The counselor said it was common for children to be reserved during transitions, especially with shared custody. Nothing actionable, they said, just keep observing. So she did. She observed how Skylar stopped requesting bedtime stories on Sundays, how she flinched when the microwave beeped too loudly, how she said sorry reflexively even when nothing was her fault. She observed how her daughter had learned to shrink, to take up less space, to disappear when the energy around her turned volatile. Olivia confided in her mother, Janet, during one of their usual late-night tea chats. Skylar had been asleep for hours. The lights were low, and the television played muted reruns in the background. "She's 6, Olivia whispered. "She shouldn't carry this." Janet sipped her tea, her expression unreadable. "You can't shield her from everything, Liv." "I'm trying," she said, voice breaking. "I'm trying so hard." "I know." Janet reached across the table, squeezing her daughter's hand. "But you're not in control of him. You never were." "I'm scared," Olivia confessed, "that she's starting to think his behavior is normal, that she'll grow up thinking love feels like walking on eggshells." Janet didn't reply right away. Then, quietly, "Then show her what it isn't." Skylar heard things. She always had. Olivia didn't realize how much until one night, weeks later, when she found her daughter curled up on the kitchen floor, blanket around her shoulders, watching Olivia silently cry at the table over an email from Trey's lawyer. She hadn't said anything. She just walked over, draped the blanket around Olivia's back, and leaned her head against her arm. That night, Olivia started the truth jar. She brought out an old mason jar, cleaned it, and told Skylar they could put anything inside. Questions, feelings, secrets, no matter how scary or silly. Each night, they'd open one and talk. Some nights, the questions were harmless. Why do people snore? What if dogs could talk? But then came the deeper ones. Will Daddy stop loving me if I like being with you more? Olivia answered truthfully. Always. She said love wasn't something that disappeared because someone else made you happy. That love didn't punish or make you scared. That it didn't come with conditions. Skylar listened with wide eyes and nodded solemnly. That jar became their lifeline. Olivia saw it as the only way to keep the door open, to let Skylar speak on her own terms. But the weekends continued, and so did the fear. One Sunday, after a particularly difficult return, Skylar barely touched her dinner. She pushed green beans around her plate and stared out the window. "Did something happen?" Olivia asked carefully. Skylar's fork stilled. Then she said, "He got mad about the charger." "What charger?" "For his phone. He said I lost it. I didn't." Olivia waited. "He yelled. A lot." Her voice was soft. "Said if I tell you anything, bad things will happen." Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat. Skylar added, almost as an afterthought, "But I think he doesn't mean it." "You think, or you hope?" Skylar didn't answer. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She replayed every warning sign, every silence, every drop-off where Skylar lingered behind in the car, not wanting to go. Every time she smiled too quickly, too brightly, like trying to mask something darker underneath. And somewhere else, in a room dimmed by nightlights and filled with stuffed animals, Skylar lay awake too, holding her unicorn, staring at the ceiling. She thought of what her grandmother had said in passing on the phone that week. "In court, it's not about who's right, it's about who's believed." Skylar was only 6, but she wasn't stupid. She knew Daddy was better at smiling than Mommy. He was louder, funnier, said words people listened to, but he also said things when no one was around. Mean things, scary things, things she wasn't supposed to repeat. But what if someone could hear? What if someone saw? Skylar sat up in bed and reached for her pink tablet on the shelf. She'd used it mostly for coloring apps and videos about dogs doing silly things, but it had a camera. She knew that. She'd used it once when pretending to be a YouTuber. She opened the camera, stared at her reflection for a long time, then turned it off and set it gently back on the shelf. She didn't know what she'd do yet, but the idea had taken root. Maybe, just maybe, if she showed someone what Daddy said, really showed them, then they'd understand. And maybe Mommy wouldn't have to cry anymore. By the time spring slid into early summer, the world outside bloomed with wild color. Green so loud it felt like a drumbeat, skies so blue they ached. But inside Olivia's small house, the walls seemed to close tighter each week. Skylar had stopped humming entirely. She walked slower, laughed less. Her drawings, once bursting with purples and yellows, were now thick black crayon circles on scrap paper that Olivia would find abandoned beneath the couch or folded and tucked between couch cushions like secrets too dangerous to leave out in the open. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Olivia opened the mailbox and saw the envelope. Thick manila, official-looking, her name typed across the front with the small embossed logo of a law firm in the top left corner. Her stomach sank before she even touched it. Inside were papers that made her fingers tremble. Trey was filing for full custody. The language was clinical, sterile, declarations of concern, allegations of instability, accusations dressed in legal vocabulary. He claimed that Olivia was emotionally erratic, that she exposed Skylar to undue stress, that her income was insufficient to provide a stable environment. There was mention of potential psychological harm, of Skylar returning from her mother's home withdrawn and anxious. Olivia sat on the floor with her back against the door, the envelope limp in her lap, and tried to breathe. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Her mouth went dry. These words on paper, words she knew weren't true, had more weight in a courtroom than anything she could say. When her mother arrived 10 minutes later, unannounced but expected in the way Janet always was, she found Olivia still on the floor, her face pale and lips pressed into a thin line. Janet didn't ask questions. She sat beside her daughter and picked up the papers. Her eyes scanned the pages slowly. Olivia didn't speak until her mother had reached the final line. "He's trying to erase me," Olivia whispered, "and he's doing it with words that sound rational." "You have the truth," Janet said simply. "That's enough." But Olivia didn't believe her, because in court, truth wasn't loud. Truth wasn't obvious. Truth was buried beneath performance, beneath bias, beneath the carefully polished act Trey had spent years perfecting. She took the papers to her lawyer the next day. A small, sharp-eyed woman named Andrea, who had been referred by a women's shelter Olivia once called late at night just to hear another voice. "He's smart," Andrea said after reading the filing. "I'll give him that. None of this is provable. It's all perception. He's building a narrative. Overwhelmed mother, stable father, child caught in the middle." "It's not true," Olivia said, though it felt like the words had no strength. "I believe you, but belief isn't enough. You'll need documentation, witnesses, a calm presence in court. You cannot afford to get emotional on the stand. You'll have to look more stable than him, even while he's dismantling your character piece by piece." Olivia left the office that day feeling like a soldier sent to battle without armor. She wanted to scream, to call the court, to pull Trey into a room and make him say the things he said when no one was around. But she couldn't. Because Trey didn't yell in public. He smiled. He joked. He held doors open and said ma'am. He donated to school fundraisers and signed Skylar's reading logs with cheerful notes. The court date was set for 3 weeks from that Friday. In the days that followed, Olivia moved through life like a ghost. She worked when she could, ate when she remembered, and tried to make Skylar's world feel normal even as hers crumbled around the edges. Skylar, ever observant, noticed. One night, after brushing her teeth, Skylar sat on the edge of her bed and watched Olivia with a strange, quiet intensity. "Are you scared of Daddy?" she asked. Olivia froze. She had always vowed never to lie to her daughter, but the question cracked something open in her. "I used to be," she answered truthfully. "Sometimes I still am." Skylar looked down at her pajama pants. "I think I'm not supposed to say that I'm scared." Olivia knelt in front of her. "You can always say what you feel. Always." Skylar didn't respond, but that night she placed a new note in the truth jar. What happens if telling the truth makes people mad? Olivia held the note in her hands long after Skylar had fallen asleep. The following weekend was Trey's turn to have Skylar again. Olivia packed her daughter's overnight bag with mechanical precision, folding her favorite shirts, tucking in her unicorn pajamas, and slipping in the sketch pad she hadn't used in weeks. Skylar slid her pink tablet into the front pocket of her backpack without saying a word. Trey arrived as scheduled, dressed in a casual button-up and jeans, sunglasses dangling from the collar. "Ready?" he asked cheerfully. Skylar nodded. He glanced at Olivia with a smile that barely masked his smugness. "We should talk soon. Maybe get ahead of the hearing." Olivia said nothing. She simply placed a hand on Skylar's back and gave it a small squeeze before letting her go. The SUV drove away. Inside the car, Trey talked a lot, mostly about how unfair everything was, how much he hated lawyers, how Olivia was trying to poison Skylar's mind. He didn't notice that his daughter was quieter than usual, that she kept her tablet tucked carefully on her lap, that her small fingers occasionally grazed the power button like a promise. When they got to his townhouse, the routine began. Dinner, a movie Skylar didn't care for, and then the talk. It was always the same talk, different words. He warned her not to believe everything her mother said, told her that Olivia was confused, fragile, manipulative. He reminded her that the court would listen to kids, and if she told anyone that she didn't like visiting him, Olivia would be in trouble. That the judge might think Mommy was turning her against Daddy, that Mommy might lose her. Skylar sat on the edge of the couch, tablet clutched tightly. Her heart beat so fast it made her ears ring. When Trey went into the kitchen to get water, she opened the camera app. Her hands were trembling, but she set the tablet quietly on the end table, angled toward the couch, and hit record. She didn't know what he would say, but she knew he would say something. He always did. When he returned, he was already angry. He claimed she had moved his phone charger, said she was careless, that she never listened. His voice rose, sharp and slicing. "You think you can just lie like your mother?" he hissed. "You think that'll work out for you? Keep going. See what happens. You'll end up in foster care." Skylar didn't respond. Her lips pressed tightly together. "You're lucky I even let you come over. If you say one word about this to her, I swear—" She flinched. And then he stood up and stormed down the hallway, slamming the bedroom door behind him. Skylar crawled across the couch, picked up the tablet and stopped the recording. Her hands were still shaking, but her chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. She placed the tablet back in her backpack and zipped it shut. The next morning, she didn't tell her father what she'd done. She just sat quietly during breakfast, eating cereal too fast and nodding to everything he said. When he dropped her off that evening, Olivia opened the door and was immediately struck by something different in her daughter's expression. It wasn't exactly relief, but there was a flicker of resolve behind those brown eyes, as if she had taken a step onto a bridge only she could see. Skylar hugged her tightly, more tightly than usual. Olivia knelt to meet her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked. Skylar nodded just once, and she didn't let go for a long time. That night, while Olivia folded laundry and tried not to think about the upcoming court date, Skylar took the tablet from her backpack and slid it under her bed. Safe, hidden. She didn't know if she'd show it to anyone. Not yet, but she had it, and for the first time, she had proof. The night after Skylar returned home from her father's house, Olivia noticed something different. It wasn't anything obvious. Skylar still brushed her teeth without being asked, still picked her favorite mismatched pajamas, still asked for her unicorn plush before bed. But there was something in the way she moved, the way she folded her arms around Olivia's neck for longer than usual, resting her head against her shoulder like she didn't want to let go. Olivia had felt that before. After tough weekends, when Skylar returned with her spirit dampened and her eyes too tired for a child her age. But this was different. This wasn't about comfort or reassurance. This was a pause, a breath held deep in her daughter's small lungs, like she was waiting for something only she could understand. After she was asleep, Olivia checked her backpack out of habit, making sure no dirty clothes were left balled at the bottom. She found everything as expected. The pink hoodie Skylar always wore, her toothpaste and hairbrush, the sketch pad she still didn't use. What she didn't notice, what Skylar had carefully concealed, was the tablet tucked deep beneath her pillow, its battery blinking low, the file saved under a name she knew only she would recognize. Truth. That week passed in a slow, uneasy rhythm. Olivia tried to focus on work, completing a round of tax audits for a small business client, but her mind drifted constantly to the court date looming on the calendar like a storm cloud. The paperwork, the strategy calls with Andrea, the endless reviewing of every incident. None of it felt like it mattered anymore. What could she possibly say that would undo Trey's illusion? How could she speak with conviction in a courtroom designed to reward confidence over content? Olivia knew the system. She had read every article, every blog post, every tear-soaked forum thread from mothers who lost custody not because they were unfit, but because they were emotional. Because they cried when they were supposed to be composed. Because they told the truth with voices too raw to be considered credible. And then there was Skylar, who began acting like nothing at all was wrong. She ate her lunch quietly, did her homework without complaint, helped fold laundry while watching cartoons. If Olivia hadn't known her daughter so well, she might have believed it was peace returning. But Olivia knew Skylar's quiet was never empty. It was filled with things she couldn't say out loud. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, Skylar's favorite, Olivia asked carefully, "Is there anything you want to talk about? Anything that's been on your mind?" Skylar took a bite of her sandwich and chewed slowly. Then, without looking up, she said, "If you want people to know the truth, do they always believe you?" The question hit Olivia like a stone in the chest. "Not always," she replied honestly, "but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try." Schuyler nodded, as if confirming something she'd already decided. That night, when Olivia went to do laundry, Schuyler climbed onto her bed, pulled the tablet from under her pillow, and opened the video file. She watched it again. Not all of it, just enough. Just the part where her father's voice rose sharp and dangerous. Just the part where he said those words she couldn't forget. "You'll end up in foster care." She had replayed that line more times than she could count. Not because she wanted to hear it, but because it reminded her why she couldn't stay quiet. It wasn't just that it was mean. It was that it made her feel like she didn't belong to herself, like she was a thing passed between grown-ups with rules she didn't get to make. The following morning, she packed her backpack as usual. Olivia made her lunch, tied her shoes, kissed the top of her head. Schuyler tucked the tablet into the front compartment herself. At school, she said nothing to her teacher, nothing to her friends. But during recess, she opened the tablet one more time to check that the video was still there. She didn't know when she'd need it, but she knew she would. Back at home that evening, Olivia was going over her case files again, flipping through printed messages between her and Trey. Most were innocuous on the surface, but every few pages there would be a jab, a dig, a comment intended to make her question herself. Can you handle this schedule, or are you still burnt out? You were 10 minutes late again. Not surprised. Tell your mother to stop interfering. She's poisoning Schuyler's brain. Andrea had told her to stay calm, to be organized, to avoid any hint of instability during the hearing. But how was she supposed to do that when the entire process felt like standing trial for her own motherhood? She glanced toward the window, where Schuyler was drawing for the first time in weeks. Olivia moved closer to see what she was working on. The paper showed a small figure standing in front of a larger one, her hand holding up something that looked like a mirror, or maybe a shield. "What's that?" Olivia asked. Schuyler looked up. "It's a truth shield." Olivia blinked. "A what?" "A shield that shows the truth," Schuyler said, matter of fact, "so people can see what's really there, even if someone tries to lie." Olivia couldn't speak for a moment. "That's beautiful," she finally said. Schuyler nodded, satisfied. "I'm going to finish it before court day." The days grew shorter as the hearing approached. Olivia found herself waking up earlier, staying up later, unable to rest. Every time she looked at her daughter, she felt the weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just a case. It was Schuyler's life, her peace, her sense of safety. Olivia wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for the right to protect her child from the person she used to love. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and overcast. Olivia wore her navy pantsuit, the one she saved for client meetings and interviews. Janet arrived at 7 sharp, dressed in her Sunday best, her church scarf tied neatly under her chin. She didn't say much, but her presence filled the apartment with a kind of quiet strength Olivia had always depended on. Schuyler wore a simple blue dress with tiny sunflowers. She chose it herself, said it made her feel calm. She packed her tablet in her backpack without a word. The drive to the courthouse was nearly silent. Schuyler stared out the window, humming a tune Olivia didn't recognize. Olivia's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Janet sat in the back seat with Schuyler holding her hand. At the courthouse, Olivia checked in with the clerk while Andrea met them at the entrance. Trey was already inside, laughing with his attorney, his suit crisp, his hair gelled perfectly into place. He looked like a man giving a TED Talk, not a father trying to take a child away from her mother. When Schuyler saw him, she didn't wave. They entered the courtroom and took their places. Olivia sat at the plaintiff's table, Schuyler and Janet behind her on the wooden bench. The judge hadn't arrived yet, but the air was thick with the hum of tension. Olivia turned to look at her daughter, trying to offer a reassuring smile. Schuyler reached into her backpack, touched the tablet for a second, then looked forward again. She didn't say a word, but Olivia saw it then, the same flicker she'd noticed days ago, that quiet resolve, that unshakable calm. Schuyler had brought something into the room with her, and Olivia didn't know what it was, but whatever it was, it gave her hope. The bailiff announced the judge's entrance. Everyone stood, and Olivia's heart began to race, not because she feared losing, but because she finally realized she wasn't the only one fighting anymore. The courtroom was colder than Olivia remembered, not just in temperature but in tone. The wooden benches, polished to a dull sheen, the seal above the judge's bench, the muffled shuffling of papers and shoes, it all felt like a machine already in motion, a place that didn't slow down for nerves or nuance. Olivia sat at the petitioner's table, her back straight, fingers clutched in her lap beneath the table to hide their trembling. Andrea sat beside her, cool and composed, her leather briefcase open, tabs already in place, but Olivia barely heard a word she said. Her mind buzzed with 100 different worries, but they all spiraled back to the same unbearable thought. Today could be the day she lost her daughter. Behind her, Janet sat upright, one hand gently resting over Schuyler's small fingers. Schuyler's sunflower dress stood out among the dull gray suits and black ties, a burst of color that seemed both innocent and defiant. She sat still, too still for a child her age, eyes scanning the room with a focus Olivia had only ever seen in adults. Trey entered the courtroom as if he owned it, all confidence and tailored lines. His attorney followed close behind, a young man with a haircut too sharp and a suit too expensive for his age. They looked like a team, a brand. Their body language was relaxed, practiced. Olivia watched Trey greet the court clerk by name, offer a charming smile to the bailiff, even leaned down to whisper something that made his lawyer chuckle. It was all theater, and he played the lead effortlessly. The judge entered, a woman Olivia had seen once before during a preliminary custody hearing. Judge Helen Carr. Late 50s, sharp eyes, a face that rarely gave anything away. She took her seat, surveyed the courtroom, and said, "Let's proceed." Trey's attorney stood first. He began with a calm, confident introduction, then launched into a detailed description of Trey as a stable, loving father. Emphasis was placed on Trey's steady income, his community involvement, his clean home, and his willingness to support Schuyler's emotional development. He spoke of structure and consistency, 2 words Olivia had learned the court loved. Then he began painting a picture of Olivia that made her stomach twist. He used phrases like emotionally overwhelmed, erratic behavior, and concerning communication patterns. He presented text messages from months ago, selected with surgical precision, one where Olivia had said she was barely holding it together, another where she asked Trey not to raise his voice around her. The implication was clear. She was unstable, reactive, unfit. Olivia sat frozen, the breath in her chest shallow. These weren't lies, not exactly, but they were truths with their context ripped away, twisted into something they weren't. Words she had written in moments of desperation, now being used as evidence that she was dangerous to her own child. Andrea objected when needed, but she remained measured, controlled. She had warned Olivia this might happen. "They'll poke at every bruise you've got," she'd said. "Just don't bleed in front of them." When it was her turn, Andrea stood and began with a brief, firm rebuttal. She spoke of Olivia's consistent care, of Skylar's emotional well-being in her mother's home, of the nurturing environment Olivia provided despite the limitations of a single income. She introduced the notes from Skylar's school counselor, gently pointing out the child's withdrawn behavior after weekends with her father. She referenced the documentation Olivia had meticulously kept, emails, messages, voicemails, but she didn't show everything. Not yet. Then Judge Carr turned her gaze to Olivia. "Miss Bennett, do you have anything you'd like to say?" Olivia opened her mouth. The words were there. All of them. The sleepless nights, the silent car rides home, the fear in Skylar's eyes, the sound of Trey's voice echoing through her phone when she'd forgotten to hang up fast enough. But none of it came out. Her throat tightened. Her mouth felt dry, and all she managed was a shallow, trembling breath. Andrea spoke up quickly to fill the silence. She offered a concise statement about the challenges of single parenting, about how emotional language didn't equate to emotional instability. She pointed out that Olivia had never missed a school meeting, never neglected a health appointment, never failed to provide for her daughter in any meaningful way. But Olivia knew it wasn't enough. The court didn't just want evidence, it wanted poise, control. Olivia's silence, her trembling hands, would read like guilt. Trey stood again, invited by his attorney to make a personal statement. He walked slowly to the front of the courtroom, turned to face the judge, and clasped his hands as if in prayer. "I'm not trying to hurt Olivia," he said, his voice calm, warm. "I'm just trying to protect my daughter. Skylar is confused. She comes back from her mother's house anxious, uncertain. She tells me things that I know don't come from her own mind, and I worry. I worry that shared custody is putting her in a situation where she doesn't know who to trust. I want what's best for her, that's all." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "I'm asking for full custody, not out of spite, but out of concern." Judge Carr nodded slowly, scribbled something in her notes, then looked again at Olivia. "Miss Bennett?" Again, Olivia tried to speak. Again, the words failed her. Her chest ached. Her palms were slick with sweat. She turned her head, just slightly, and met Skylar's eyes. Skylar, small and solemn, gave her mother the faintest nod. And then, before anyone could stop her, Skylar stood. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "Your Honor," she said, her voice small but clear, "I brought something from Daddy's phone. I think you should see it." Every head turned. Trey's attorney looked confused. Trey's face drained of color. Olivia spun in her seat, stunned. Skylar stepped forward, backpack in her hands. She opened it, pulled out the pink tablet, and clutched it to her chest like a treasure. Judge Carr blinked. "Excuse me?" "It's from last weekend," Skylar said. "He didn't know I was awake, but I was. I recorded it because I thought if nobody believed Mommy, maybe they'd believe him." The courtroom was dead silent. The judge glanced at the bailiff. "Bring it here." Skylar walked forward, past the wooden benches, past her father's shocked expression, and placed the tablet in the bailiff's hands. The bailiff brought it to the judge, who turned the screen toward herself and tapped the play button. At first, there was just background noise. Then Trey's voice, harsh, unmistakable. "You think you're so smart, huh? Go ahead, try telling anyone, see what happens. You'll end up living in some foster home and don't think your precious mother can save you. She's pathetic." There was a scraping sound, the clatter of a plate. Then Skylar's voice, small and frightened. I'm sorry." "Don't talk back," Trey snapped. "You're lucky I even let you come over. If you say a word to her, I swear—" The judge paused the video. Trey stood frozen. His attorney opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Judge Carr set the tablet aside and looked directly at Trey. "Mr. Blake, do you wish to explain this?" He stepped forward, his voice brittle. "That video is taken completely out of context. She was misbehaving. I was disciplining her. She—" "Enough," the judge said, her voice low but firm. Trey fell silent. The judge looked back to Skylar, who now stood beside Olivia, her small hand resting against her mother's side. "Thank you for being brave," the judge said. Skylar nodded. "You can return to your seat." Janet reached out and pulled her granddaughter into her lap. Olivia reached down and took Skylar's hand, squeezing it once, hard, before looking back up at the judge. "Miss Bennett," Judge Carr said, "do you have anything further to add?" Olivia looked at her daughter, then at the judge. "No, Your Honor," she said, voice steady. "I think my daughter said it all." Judge Carr leaned back in her chair, eyes closed for a moment. "In light of this evidence," she said finally, "I'm ordering an immediate review of all custody arrangements. Until that is completed, full temporary custody will be granted to Miss Bennett. Mr. Blake will have supervised visitation only. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Blake from the courtroom." Trey's face twisted. "You can't be serious." "Sir," the bailiff said, stepping forward. Trey looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He turned and walked out, his attorney scrambling after him. The courtroom emptied slowly after that. Reporters whispered. Other families stared, but Olivia didn't move. Skylar sat quietly, head on her grandmother's shoulder. When Olivia finally stood, her legs wobbled beneath her, but she walked to her daughter and knelt beside her. "You were so brave," she whispered. Skylar didn't say anything, but she leaned into her mother's arms, and Olivia held her as tightly and carefully as she could, realizing that for the first time in months, they were no longer sinking. They were rising, together. The air outside the courthouse was sharp with early morning wind, though the sun had already risen above the rooftops, casting long shadows across the stone steps. Olivia stood with her arms wrapped around Skylar while Janet walked beside them, scanning the sidewalk with cautious glances, as though expecting Trey to reappear, to try and reclaim what he'd just lost. But he was gone, escorted out under the silent authority of a bailiff, his voice silenced not by shouting or pleading, but by the simple, devastating truth that had spilled from the pink tablet in Skylar's small hands. The echo of his threats still rang faintly in Olivia's ears, as if the courtroom still held the sound of his fury trapped in its walls. Yet, as she looked at her daughter beside her, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. She felt breath returning to her body. Not relief. Relief was still too far away. But the first sign of oxygen, the beginning of something different. They didn't speak much on the walk to the car. Janet opened the back door and helped Skylar in, then turned to Olivia and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. No words passed between them, but the weight of that touch said enough. "I'm here. You did it. She's safe." Olivia started the car with a shaking hand. When they pulled into Janet's driveway, the familiar creak of the gate, the lavender bushes trimmed low against the brick wall, and the ceramic wind chime by the porch gave Olivia a fragile sense of stillness. Inside, the house smelled like warmth, cinnamon, detergent, and the faintest hint of old wood. Janet went straight to the kitchen, muttering something about making soup even though it was too warm outside for soup. It was her ritual on hard days. She said it gave her something to stir when the world felt untethered. Olivia didn't argue. She helped Skylar out of her dress and into one of Janet's oversized t-shirts, then wrapped her in a throw blanket and settled her at the kitchen table with a sheet of paper and a box of crayons. Skylar drew quietly for almost an hour. She didn't speak. She didn't hum. She just moved her hand slowly across the page, as though every line required careful thought. Olivia sat nearby on the couch, the court documents spread out on the coffee table. Andrea's follow-up instructions printed neatly in a folder. There would be more to do. The judge had granted temporary custody, but there would be hearings, evaluations, supervised visits. Nothing was truly over. But for the first time, Olivia didn't feel like she was battling the tide alone. Skylar eventually rose from her seat and crossed the room, her drawing held flat between both hands. Olivia looked up and took it from her, expecting another picture of stick figures or lopsided hearts. But this time it was different. Two hands, drawn in thick, steady lines, held a large red heart between them. Beneath the image, in uneven block letters, Skylar had written, "Truth is brave." Olivia stared at the drawing for several seconds before her vision blurred. She didn't try to hide her tears. Skylar stood in front of her, calm and quiet, her expression unreadable. Olivia reached out, pulled her daughter into her lap, and held her there, rocking slightly as the silence settled around them like a blanket. That night, back in their own apartment, Olivia tucked Skylar into bed with extra care. The nightlight glowed softly in the corner. Pepper, the unicorn, had been freshly washed and smelled of dryer sheets. Olivia sat beside her, stroking her curls. "Are you okay?" she asked finally. Skylar looked at the ceiling for a moment, then at her mother. "I didn't want to do it, but I had to." "I know," Olivia whispered, "and I'm so proud of you." Skylar shrugged. "I just didn't want to be scared anymore." "You shouldn't have had to carry that," Olivia said, the ache in her chest rising again. Skylar blinked slowly. "I didn't know if they would believe me." "They did," Olivia said, "because you were strong enough to tell the truth." Skylar didn't respond, but she reached out and wrapped her fingers around her mother's wrist, holding her there until her breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. The next morning, Olivia called Andrea to inform her that Skylar had given the drawing to her and asked if she could bring it to court next time. Andrea told her yes, of course, but more importantly, she confirmed that the judge had officially opened a full review of Trey's custodial fitness. A court-appointed counselor would begin evaluations next week. There would be home visits, there would be psychological assessments, and most importantly, Trey would not be permitted unsupervised contact with Skylar until the process was complete. Olivia hung up the phone and sat quietly for several minutes, staring at the stack of papers in front of her. There was so much left to do, but the mountain didn't feel so impossible anymore. That afternoon, Skylar taped the drawing to her bedroom wall. 2 hands, 1 heart, truth is brave. Each evening, they returned to the truth jar. The old mason jar, dusty from weeks of neglect, now sat on the edge of Skylar's desk like a guardian. Olivia opened it gently, letting Skylar choose the folded slip of paper. The first night, the note read, "What happens when the truth hurts people?" Olivia looked at her daughter, who waited with solemn eyes. "Did you write this?" Skylar nodded. "I didn't want to hurt Daddy," she said. "I just didn't want to be scared anymore." Olivia took a long breath. The truth can hurt sometimes, but silence hurts more. What you didn't hurt anyone. You protected yourself. You protected us. That's not wrong. Skylar stared at the jar, her small brow furrowed in thought. "I think we should keep doing this," she said. Olivia smiled. "We will, every night." The counselor's visit came the following Tuesday. She was a kind woman with warm eyes and a notepad she barely touched. She asked questions gently, with pauses long enough to allow Schuyler to answer in her own time. Olivia stayed in the other room, listening to the distant murmur of their voices, resisting the urge to hover. When the counselor left, she placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder. "She's a remarkable little girl," she said. "She shouldn't have had to be," Olivia replied. "I know," the counselor said softly, "but she's safe now. That's what matters." Over the next few weeks, Schuyler began to return to herself. She painted again. She laughed without flinching. She asked for second helpings at dinner and started reading aloud to Pepper. Olivia watched her bloom cautiously, afraid that any moment Trey might come back and crush it all. But he didn't. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted. His lawyer had issued a single statement of compliance after the hearing and nothing since. Olivia suspected that the recording had done more than damage his case. It had cracked the carefully curated image he spent years constructing. The final hearing was scheduled for mid-July. Until then, supervised visits were allowed twice a month at a neutral visitation center with trained staff. Olivia explained this to Schuyler in simple terms, that she wouldn't be alone, that there would be people there to keep her safe. Schuyler had listened, then said quietly, "Can I draw during those visits?" "Of course," Olivia said. The first supervised visit was brief. Schuyler barely spoke. Trey tried to act as if nothing had changed, but Schuyler didn't respond to his jokes, didn't meet his eyes. When she returned to Olivia afterward, she handed her a drawing of a tree with deep roots and no leaves. "It's not growing yet," she explained, "but it's safe." Olivia placed it beside the others on the refrigerator. At night, Schuyler began adding new notes to the truth jar. One read, "Do brave people still get scared?" "Yes," Olivia said. "They just don't let fear be the end of their story." Another read, "Can kids protect grown-ups too?" Olivia didn't answer right away. She took Schuyler's hand and said, "You did." She meant it more than Schuyler could possibly understand. Each day felt a little less like survival and a little more like life. There were still hard moments. Olivia still had dreams of the courtroom, of Trey's voice raised in anger, of Schuyler standing too small and too still in the center of it all. But they faded by morning. In time, Olivia began attending therapy again. Not because she was breaking, but because she finally had space to process what she had endured. She realized how long she had existed in emergency mode, always responding, always defending. Now she was learning to breathe again, to hope. Schuyler began drawing homes again, this time with windows, with sunshine, with people holding hands instead of standing apart. One morning, Olivia found a note taped to the outside of the truth jar. It said, "The truth made me brave, but you made me safe." She folded it, placed it inside the jar, and left the lid off. They didn't need to seal the truth away anymore. Now it lived with them, out in the open. The courthouse looked different in the light of July. Where it once loomed like a fortress, it now felt like a familiar structure. Still formidable, still cold, but no longer unconquerable. Olivia walked up the stone steps slowly. Schuyler's hand tucked gently into her own, while Janet followed a few steps behind, her heels clicking a steady rhythm against the concrete. The wind had stilled. The city around them buzzed with summer life. Car horns, birdsong, the laughter of teenagers spilling out of a nearby diner. But inside Olivia's chest there was only quiet. Not the terrifying silence of dread, but the stillness that comes after a storm has passed. A silence where things could begin again. The final custody hearing had arrived 4 weeks after Schuyler's brave act in that courtroom, 4 weeks since her small voice had broken through the noise and given the truth a place to stand. In that time, everything had shifted. The court-appointed counselor's report had arrived, and it was as thorough as it was damning. Olivia had read every word with a kind of disbelief that teetered between vindication and grief. Trey had denied everything, of course. He called it exaggerated, claimed the counselor was biased, said the video was a misrepresentation of tone. But the report painted a different picture. Controlling behavior, lack of empathy, refusal to acknowledge his daughter's emotional distress, an obsessive focus on power over parenting. It was the first time an official voice had put into words what Olivia had been living with in silence for years. Schuyler had not seen her father outside the supervised visits. The 2 sessions that took place at the neutral center had been short and awkward. Trey had tried to perform kindness, to pretend nothing had changed, but Schuyler's cool politeness and quiet drawings of leafless trees left little space for pretense. She didn't cry. She didn't speak much. She didn't run into his arms the way she used to. She simply existed in his presence like a child fulfilling an obligation. Olivia hadn't asked how she felt after each session. She waited until Schuyler brought it up herself, which she finally did after the second visit. "He doesn't look like the same daddy anymore," she said simply. "It's like he shrunk." Olivia had smiled, blinking back tears. "Sometimes, when we see people clearly, they seem smaller." In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Olivia felt her own shape returning. Not the woman she'd been before Trey, but someone new. Someone forged in the fire of motherhood and legal battle, of nights with no sleep and days spent gathering courage grain by grain. Therapy helped. So did the truth jar. Each night, Schuyler wrote less about fear and more about wonder. Her questions shifted from survival to curiosity. One night she wrote, "What if the moon is watching us?" And Olivia laughed for the first time in what felt like months. Now, as they entered the courtroom again, and it no longer felt like walking into a battlefield, it felt like crossing a finish line. Trey was already seated when they arrived. He looked thinner, less composed. His suit hung differently, still expensive, still sharp, but ill-fitting in a way Olivia recognized. The man who had once thrived in public attention now looked exposed, like someone trying to play a role he no longer believed in. His attorney sat beside him, no longer relaxed, flipping through papers with restless fingers. Olivia took her seat, Andrea beside her, and offered Schuyler a small smile as she joined Janet behind the barrier. Schuyler was dressed in soft pink today, a color Olivia had noticed she'd started wearing more often. For a long time, she'd refused anything bright. Now, she chose her clothes without fear. Olivia had let her. The judge entered with the same quiet authority, her expression unreadable, her robe flowing like water behind the bench. She called the session to order, then began speaking directly without preamble. "I've reviewed the documents submitted, including the full evaluation report from the appointed counselor, as well as the transcript of our last hearing and the evidence presented therein. Before I deliver my ruling, I want to acknowledge the difficulty of this process for everyone involved, especially the child at the center of this matter." Olivia's breath caught in her chest. Family court is not designed to punish, but to protect. In this case, the court has had the rare and sobering opportunity to witness firsthand the impact of a parent's behavior on a child's emotional safety. The video presented in our last session, combined with professional assessments and the child's own testimony, provide overwhelming evidence of psychological harm and manipulation that cannot be dismissed or minimized. There was a pause, long enough for Trey to shift uncomfortably in his seat. It is the decision of this court to award full physical and legal custody to Miss Olivia Bennett. Mr. Trey Blake will be granted supervised visitation twice a month at the discretion of the custodial parent and the appointed visitation center. There will be no overnight stays until further review and compliance with court-mandated counseling is confirmed. The gavel hit the bench with a soft, final thud. Trey's lawyer leaned in, whispered something urgent, but Trey didn't respond. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his shoulders stiff. Olivia didn't look at him. She looked at Skylar, who had turned in her seat to face her, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Olivia smiled. Skylar didn't smile back, but she gave a tiny nod. It was enough. They left the courtroom quietly. No one said anything until they reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. Janet took Skylar's hand and walked ahead to the car while Olivia paused, letting the weight of the moment settle into her bones. She looked back once at the doors behind them. The place that had once terrified her now held a memory of victory, not the kind with cheering or celebration, but the quiet kind. The kind built on endurance, on truth, on a child's unshakable instinct to be believed. Later that evening, they went to a diner Skylar loved, the one with the red booths and animal-shaped pancakes. Olivia didn't have much appetite, but Skylar ate everything on her plate and asked for chocolate milk with 2 cherries instead of 1. The waitress smiled as she set it down. "Is it over now?" Skylar asked between sips. Olivia considered the question. She didn't want to lie. "It's safer now," she said. "We're not done growing through this, but we're not afraid anymore." Skylar nodded thoughtfully, swirling the cherries with her straw. "I'm glad I told." "So am I," Olivia whispered. There were nights after that where Olivia still woke up sweating, heart pounding, visions of courtroom lights and Trey's voice chasing her into the dark. But they passed. Less often, less loud. There were days she still had to catch her breath when she walked past the family photo she hadn't taken down yet. Not because she missed Trey, but because she still mourned the version of herself who thought she had to be silent to survive. Skylar kept drawing. Her pictures grew more detailed. Houses with windows, gardens with flowers in bloom, families holding hands. She drew the truth jar once, with tiny pieces of paper floating above it like petals. She taped it to her bedroom wall. Each night they returned to the jar, though sometimes now they just talked. The questions had changed. One night, Olivia pulled a note that said, "Can you be free even if you're still healing?" She read it aloud and smiled. "Yes," she said, "freedom is when you get to heal on your own terms." A few days later, Skylar wrote, "If I told the truth and it helped, does that make me a helper?" Olivia nodded and said, "It makes you a hero." And then, one morning, she found a note that simply read, "I think I'm happy again." It was written in a purple marker with a little smiley face next to the words. Olivia folded it carefully, pressed it to her heart, and cried for all the right reasons. Months passed. Trey faded into the distance. He attended the required counseling sessions, but Olivia wasn't waiting for him to change. She didn't need to anymore. Skylar no longer asked when she'd see him again. When visitation came, she approached it calmly, like a task. But when it ended, she always ran straight back into her mother's arms. That was all Olivia needed to know. One evening, as the sky turned orange and the cicadas sang through the window screens, Olivia sat on the porch while Skylar played with sidewalk chalk on the driveway. Janet brought 2 glasses of lemonade and joined her. "She's different now," Janet said after a long pause. "She's free," Olivia replied. Janet smiled, took a sip, and said nothing more. Skylar finished her chalk drawing and ran up the steps to show it to them. "It's us," she said proudly, "and we're not afraid anymore." Olivia looked at the image. 3 figures under a tree with big roots, a heart floating between them, and above, in big block letters, "The truth matters." She reached for her daughter and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Yes," she whispered, "it does." And in that moment, with the sun setting behind them and the future stretching open like a long, quiet road, Olivia knew that what they had built would last. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest, because it was brave, because it was theirs. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and check out our other videos for more powerful stories like this one.